I'm a very old woman. I was born above my father's restaurant in Providence, Rhode Island, 99 years ago, in the second decade of the 20th century, and I'm amazed that I'm still here in the second decade of the 21st century. Up there is a picture of my paternal grandmother who never left her Chinese village, but who died there in 1934 at the age of 104, and they gave her 3 extra years because she had 3 sons. So they said they celebrated her 107th birthday. Over here is a picture of Lyman Payne, who was a descendant of Robert Treat Payne, who was the signer of the Declaration of Independence. I don't know how many have heard of him, but you know all about the Declaration of Independence. He believed very much that all men are created equal and that they're endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, the right to life, liberty, and happiness, and that to secure these rights, governments are created, and that when governments become destructive of these ends, it is the right and duty of the people to abolish such governments and to create such forms as to them should seem more likely to bring about life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. I don't know how many people know that, but I believe that that is very much a part of the American Revolution, much more than in any other country in the world. And that is one of the things that makes people, say in a city like Detroit, when everything is growing and falling apart, feel that they have a right and a duty to create something new. It's something that I think exists in no other country. And there's a book over there on the shelf, in the 4th shelf, called The Unruly Americans. And it talks about how this country is very unusual in the sense that the king was very far away when people came here, and they started doing things for themselves. So it's very much a do-it-yourself country. And it's one of the things that I discovered when I came here to Detroit. I moved here to Detroit something like 60 years ago, and I've lived in this house for 50 years. And when I came here, the Packard plant was still operating. The Chrysler Jefferson plant, where my husband worked, employed 17,000 workers. If you threw a stone up in the air on the way down, you'd hit an auto worker. A year later, because a lot of people had left the city to go to the suburbs because there were too many black people here, and because they took their taxes and their schools with them, if you threw a stone up in the air, on the way down it would hit a vacant lot or abandoned house. And a lot of people looked at that abandonment as blight and the end of Detroit. Instead, what happened was that people began using those vacant lots to grow food and to start an urban agricultural movement. And I think it's very important to look at the city that way, to understand that the history of the country and the ideas of the country and the tendency to do for yourself when those who are in power cannot do for you, that is part of this country. It makes me very happy to be American. And I think that the people who make a revolution I don't know about the rest of the world, but what people who make a revolution here do it because they love this country enough to change it. Please remember that. We love this country enough to change it. So, any questions?
It's all yours. So you have it. We're going to try to use this, and you have to keep it like you're a spoken word rap artist or something.
I'm hard of hearing. I'm old.
Okay, so who would like? It's all your questions.
I have a question.
Oh, hold it, hold it. Do this.
Are you recording this? Yes. Can you send it to me?
Well, I have a question for you. You said that you have lived in this house for a little more than 60 years, but why did you move to Detroit in the first
Would
place?
you repeat the question?
The question is, why did you move to Detroit in the first place?
I moved to Detroit in the first place because I thought the workers were going to revolt, instead of which they declined. I came here as a Marxist. And all my ideas came from books, and when I came here, well, I found the reality was very different.
So what did you find? What did you find here?
Well, first of all, I found a husband. And he was very much a man of the country. He was born and raised in a little town where there were more pigs than people. But he was like many people in the South who knew that they had survived through slavery and Jim Crow, and who felt you could always make a way out of no way. And that's very much a part. There's a book on the fourth shelf called The Promised Land. It's the one that has the
Sticker.
little orange thing there. It's written by Nicholas Leland, who was the Dean of Journalism at the Columbia University. And he talks about the migration of the Southern people to the North as one of the most important migrations in history. I don't know whether there's anything like that in Europe, but I think the understanding of how a bunch of people came north and scared the living daylights out of a lot of white people, but brought the idea of the country to the city. And that's one of the, I mean, I don't know how many you think about the Neolithic age, but the Neolithic age, when people began to settle and went from hunting and gathering to living in villages, was a fantastic age, both in terms of the relationships among people and in terms of the birth of all the great religions, all of which had a version of the Golden Rule in them. I think very often when I look around here in Detroit, I think of those centuries, 2 centuries before Christ, when we went from the Bronze Age to the Iron Age.
Do you think there is hope for Detroit?
Do you think there is hope for Detroit?
I think there's great hope for Detroit. I think people are coming here from all over the world. And I tell you something else. Last week, the Chancellor of the University of Michigan in Dearborn was here because we're in a state where people know that everything has to change. Primary schools, high schools, middle schools, and also universities. It's one of the most extraordinary times in the history of humanity. And I hope you all feel that as you move around here in Detroit.
Just a quick, the hope is not about returning to the past concepts of success. It's about creating something very, very, very new.
It's called Shaking the World with a New Dream. It comes from a poem which we wrote and which is on that oval up there. We are the children of Martin and Malcolm, black, brown, yellow, and white. And our right, our duty, is to challenge the world with a new dream.
Keep going. This is a once in a lifetime.
Can you explain what a dream is?
Well, the dream used to be of nobility, and that dream is facing, that dream did a lot of damage to our souls. It caused us to enslave a lot of people in order to create a lot, and it's also facing the planet with extermination. And that's the time it is on the clock of the world. And I hope that as you look around, as you turn around, you think about that threat of extermination of all species, including the human. And that's why you have to shake the world with a new dream.
Anybody else?
Hi.
Yes, oh, sure, please.
What was Detroit like when you came here? How did you experience it when you came here first?
What was Detroit like when you first got here?
Well, as I said, if you threw a stone up in the air, you'd hit an auto worker on the way down. And because a lot of people had gotten seniority during the war from working, they had accumulated money and they were buying houses and fixing them up. And it was prosperous as hell. And if you look around you, all around me, across the street that way, across the street that way, and across this next door, are abandoned houses. That's not what it was like when I came here.
From 1945 to 1973 was the age of the American Empire. Everybody else was devastated from World War II. We dropped the bomb in Nagasaki and Hiroshima, and we did extra bombing in Europe.
And then Germany and Japan started producing cars, and the United States was no longer the motor capital of the world.
I've got a question. So you say a lot of people left, a lot of abandoned homes. Do you resent the people that left this neighborhood and moved to the suburbs?
I think the suburbs, I don't know how it is in Europe, but by and large the suburbs are the most reactionary part of the country. They are where the most Republicans and Koch brothers, I don't know how much you know them, where they live. The people in Congress depend on them to create devastation.
Did you yourself ever think about leaving Detroit?
Did you ever think about leaving Detroit?
Every time I have to leave here, I want to come back. Because, you know, something is happening here. And when you live in a place where a lot of people come for hope and a lot of people leave from despair, you really have a chance to live someplace.
And also part of the thinking is that there's no such thing as a general revolution, but revolutions are very particular to place and time. So when Grace talks about the importance of being here in Detroit for all these years, it's about taking responsibility for Detroit and for the country, which is different from often the classical radical analysis, which has revolution as a generalization.
I don't know how many of you realize that most revolutions in this country have taken place in economically undeveloped countries. And one of their first responsibilities was to increase economic growth. And that created a certain dynamic. And that's very different here. And to live in a city where the concept of revolution is actually changing right in front of you, and you're part of changing it, is fantastic.
Anybody else who hasn't got a chance yet?
In what way can poor families that now live in Detroit can find hope in a city that's struck by devastation and emptiness?
How do poor families in Detroit find hope when there's so much devastation?
We have to help them find it. That is one. We're going to hold a convention, and that's going to be my first resolution, that we see ourselves to help not just a few of us, the Bach Center, but to help the whole city know what it stands for internationally and globally.
And so I want to add to that too. I want to add to that in terms of helping find hope. Hi, I'm Kim with the Boggs Center, and being a native Detroiter in a community that is, you might call it devastated. But since I've been here, so the hope comes with the vision, and the hope comes with the modeling and examples of each one of us, and being very active in a community. There, I feel many community activists that are on fire. You know, really, we're really on fire to change what is. So we don't only see with our eyes, we actually see with our spirits, we see with our creativity. And as Grace said, you know, we don't see with our eyes only. Much of one of the ways to actually stay here and to be energized and move forward is to not to see with your eyes, but to see with your creativity and to make some great things happen. And then lastly, I can tell you to just stay hopeful and to stay on point. It's very important to be with like-minded people, and it's very contagious. I've been very fortunate to be part of the Boggs Center and some of the other organizations that I've been involved with. And I'm really excited about what's happening. I'm excited about creating whatever we want to. And I believe that now. I didn't believe that before I got here. I always tell people after being here for a while, I thought, really? You mean I really can change the world? I used to think that I can change I knew that I could change people around me and then small, but my vision has gotten so much bigger. And I've seen results of that. I've actually experienced it. So,
how many of you know that in the 1950s, Einstein said that imagination is more important than education? Think of that in terms of what your responsibility, what your challenge is, what your opportunity is, to imagine another world.
Did you have been scared during the riots and that kind of stuff?
That's a great question. He would like to know if you were scared during the riots / rebellion in Detroit.
I wasn't here, I was on the West Coast. But I think the most important thing is not to call it a riot. People name things according to who they are. The forces of law and order see a rebellion or protest as a riot. What you name a thing determines how you think about it and what you do about it. One of the most important things is to understand that there were reasons and causes for rebellion on the part of the black population of the city. And that even though they called it a revolution, they were calling it too much, but they were doing much better than allowing it to be called a riot. What you name something matters.
Yes. Back to you.
Well, if there's no one
Anybody else? Go ahead. Is there anybody else? Just raise your hand.
Not you?
I have a question. To what extent should we rely on changes in the political system? For example, the change of a mayor, is that of any significance?
Well, I think that one of the most important things to learn from the United States is that change does not come from the Capitol, it comes from the streets. Just look at the civil rights movement and think of how long it would have taken for somebody in Washington to get rid of Jim Crow. It came from the actions of people. How many people know the book, The Third Wave, which is on the middle shelf in the middle there?
That's it. No, this one. Oh, you got two copies.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Should I pass it on?
Sure, just pass it around, sure.
I really urge people to get that book and think about how it talks about the first wave was the agrarian, the second wave was the industrial, the third wave is what he calls the prosumer, where we don't do things through the market. And we realize how much, depending on how much we have idealized industrialization and have not recognized how much it involves standardization, specialization, centralization, and making the individual a fragment of a person tied to the machine. You know that scene in Modern Times where Charlie Chaplin is tied to the machine? Think of how we've idealized that and not thought of what it was doing to the human being.
You said something is happening here. Can you maybe tell us a bit more about that? About what is happening, or what do you feel that is happening? Maybe describe it a bit more, what you mean with that.
Do you want to share what you see is happening in Detroit at this point that gives people hope?
Well, you haven't been on the tour yet?
They haven't been on the tour.
Well, I hope very much when you go on the tour, you will see with your heart and not just with your eyes. See with your imagination and not just with the brain that you got from going to school. I see a lot of hope in Detroit because I see people thinking in terms of feeding themselves. I think of them reconnecting with the earth. I think of this kind of life as the only life that will save us from the kind of things that we've been doing over the last century to destroy the planet, to destroy the oceans and the air.
Some more questions? This couch has been pretty quiet. Anyone, you must be thinking of things.
I'm having trouble finding to ask, actually. Something that's...
Maybe a question for us. We're all from outside Detroit. We're coming here to learn about the city, learn from people such as yourselves. What message do you have for us to take back to our home country, to take back to the Netherlands?
I think if you will look at Detroit and look at what time it is on the clock of our planet and realize what dangers we face, you will go back to your home country and say, the time is now to begin thinking in historical terms, in very long-range terms, in terms of, say, from the Paleolithic to the Neolithic, to think in terms of what kind of individuals we have been, what kinds of creatures we have become as a result of capitalism, how much individualism, how much consumerism, how much of a radical revolution of values we need to make.
I have a question just for you all. So what's been some of your general, you've been here for how long?
3 days.
3 days. So what's been some of your initial experiences or thoughts, or is there anything that captured you or was surprising when you got here?
I think the most confronting for me was the division between the racial lines. So you have the suburbs and the more devastated or vacant neighborhoods around the downtown area, and that was, it was very confronting for me to see, because before we went here, we prepared by lectures on Detroit, and you have a certain image of the city, but when you get here, it's just you can't capture it in a picture. It's just, you have to see it.
Okay. Anybody else want to speak to that?
Well, I think first before we came here...
Speak up a little bit.
Oh, sorry.
So you can hear.
I think first before we came here as students, we see the images of Detroit, and you see the empty buildings and the vacant lots, empty factories, and you learn about the decline and the disappearance of the influence in the auto industry and stuff, very negative images. And then we came here, first from Toronto, which is a thriving city. We see the downtown of Detroit and we see, oh, things aren't that bad, because when you see there, you see bars and you see people on the street and stuff. And then after that, we went to actually see Midtown and the emptiness. But then again, every day you get a new experience. And today, I think the things I have seen personally, I think there's very much hope for Detroit. And there are people trying to change it, and there's a great opportunity to do so. So that's, well, it has changed for me incredibly, how I see it.
Yeah, yesterday first we went to the suburbs, and then we came to
Heidelberg.
No, to the mall.
Oh, Somerset.
To Somerset, and then you see the differences between all that areas. And after that, last night we were in a bar, and there was the Motown music, and there came, yeah, kind of famous artists, and it was, yeah, unbelievable. There's indeed something. It gives emotions.
Thank you. Did anybody else want to speak to that question? Or is anything on your minds that you want to say? This is kind of thinking about.
Anybody else?
Yes, I'm just wondering, I mean, there are definitely things going on, but the question is it enough? Like, how big is it actually? And I mean, of course it creates hope, but yeah, is it enough, or do we need projects like Future City Detroit to help us too? How do you think about that, for example?
You know, the first thing that came to my mind, enough for what? You know, so when you say enough for what do you, enough for what?
I think enough for people to have a good life. And
what's a good life?
What is a good life? I think a good life is to have enough food, to live in a neighborhood that's not stricken by violence.
Okay.
Yeah, like, I mean, just the basic things, which I don't think everybody has here. So I'm just wondering.
I actually agree with you that everybody doesn't have that right now. And just for myself, we don't know. I don't know if it's enough, honestly. So I ask the same question. I struggle with that question every day. Is it enough? How much time do we have? What have you? But what's important is that we do something. And I just have a lot of faith that some positive will come out of it. And if we keep working at it, because as human beings, I learned that everything is, you just never know what'll happen. So no, I don't know if it's enough, but I want to keep working towards it.
Let me add to that. I think it's a first of all, the history of future cities. The only reason they're talking about green cities and some urban gardening is because of what was emerged some 20 years ago when those folks who came from the South, African American men and women, hooked up with young people to create the community gardening movement. So the only reason it's even on the agenda is because people that had a vision of what could be began to put it forward. So now there are 1,600, 1,700 community gardens in the city of Detroit. People are now creating food co-ops. Okay? There's enough open land in Detroit for everybody to feed themselves. And 10 years ago, if you said that to someone, they would say, oh, you must be crazy. What do you mean, feed ourselves? But you have that conversation now, and people say, that's possible. So the conversation changes. Whether or not Future Cities as a program is significant, we'll see. We'll see how serious those people in government really are about supporting grassroots. And when you see Myrtle and Wayne, you'll get a sense of some of the work that they're doing that has been pushing this whole conversation. The other thing is, how does change happen? And if you read some of Margaret Wheatley's writing, or chapter 1 in Grace's book, she talks about the difference between quantum physics and Newtonian physics, and the concept of emergence. And that out of emerging projects, out of emerging visions and programs, come a new way. Capitalism didn't come out of feudalism, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. People made choices. So the question is, what choices do people make in this period of transition that will allow us to create the kind of society? Is it fast enough to eliminate the pain as much as we love to? Of course not. Every day we hear of someone who gets shot, we want to rip our heads out that we haven't figured out how to do restorative justice or create peace zones for life or put the neighbor back into the... Of course not. That's not the question. The question is, are we asking the right, are we putting on the agenda of this Detroit moment the discussion that says the people are responsible for what we call a cultural revolution to change what is success, what is community. That's why Jimmy Boggs' writings, what I just gave you to read, is all about how do we create community. And it's about how do we transform ourselves. When Martin Luther King talked about the need to fight against racism, materialism, and militarism, the evil triplets, racism, militarism, and materialism, he was saying we needed a radical revolution in values. That's the dream that we're talking about creating, that's built on the history of how do we overcome racism and capitalism based on a new moment in human history. So it's not about the system changing, that we erase it and we create a new system. It's how do you create new people to create new ways of life that eventually will turn into some systems we imagine. Right? How do we go back? And we'll talk about this on the tour a lot, actually. Okay? We should do a few more. And I don't know if you're going to join us on the tour. If not, you should throw it. Okay. A few more and then we should go. Otherwise, well, unless you want to stay, it's up to you.
We're...
I have to wait for
Oh, yeah.
To what extent you nowadays still feel that the consequences of discrimination and racial tensions that have characterized Detroit for a long time, and maybe still do?
As the... Okay, let me do your words. How is racism and discrimination expressing itself now, even though it's 40 years after the Civil Rights Movement? Is that okay?
Well, it's very hard to tell. You know, the young people who come here are mostly white. I mean, black people are trying still to get upward. They come here, and there's difficulty. How do we relate to them? Do we think of them as the white people who were on top, or do we think that they are people who are also looking for hope, who also want to be part of the future? I think it's a very scary time. I don't know how many have seen the film about me. But
we will see it when we get back to the Netherlands. I'm getting a copy for us to see.
You know, I was in... the film showed at Barnard College where I went, and it showed in the Castro in the Bay Area. And it was very scary. Because it's a very scary time. As I was leaving in the Bay Area, people began clapping, and I felt they are looking for a leader, because the time is so difficult. And then at Barnard College, the people have seen the film, and they came down, they wanted to touch me. Scared the living daylights out of me. I think it's a very scary time. People are looking for solutions and thinking they have to be grand solutions. And the solutions are like planting some leeks and some green peppers and some eggplants in your garden.
The other part of that conversation is when we say this is a revolutionary period, we also know it's a counter-revolutionary period. So it's very reminiscent of Germany in the 1930s, where the crisis is so intense that all the ugliness of what history has been, the racism gets uglier. So it goes from 20% unemployment to 50% unemployment.